I'm Joey Reynolds, and I'm here to interview somebody, but I don't do interviews anyway. We're just going to hang out a little bit because it's a very important subject and a good one, and also an interesting one. And it better be interesting. Otherwise, you're going to go away, and we want you to stay with us and pay attention. I want to mention, though, I'm wearing a shirt in honor of what happened in Maui, Hawaiian shirt. I think this is an appropriate shirt. It's black for those who passed, and then white for those who have hope. And that's my Hawaiian tribute. I spent a lot of time in Maui, but that's a whole other show. I wanted to pay tribute no matter what the rest of the broadcast, because I know it's going to be a long time before that island recovers. There's a thing in this world right now, it's the most horrible thing next to murdering a loved one, and that has happened, and we do see it on the news. The most horrible thing is to harm children. They haven't had a chance to live. A chance, meaning time. They haven't had this great experience that I spoke of moments ago. You have to be here for a while to have experience, but you have to not be interrupted. And one of the interruptions is to take a child's life and to squeeze it from them by trafficking them and putting them in a place where they are flesh for sale. And this is not prostitution, and this is not some sort of a bunny ranch in Las Vegas. That's an adult volunteer program. This is not even lust. It's just simply murder of children. And it's the worst crime that I could think of on the whole planet. Thou shalt not kill is enough. But thou shalt not kill children is just about the worst thing I could think of in my life. And I have 5 grandchildren, and I can't imagine anybody doing anything to them. So what do? There's a film about it right now. It's caught everybody's attention this summer. It preceded Barbie Doll, which is a nice way to forget that we have lives. And then the other thing, too, which I find very amazing, is that there's a channel called Angel Studio, and on that channel they show all these films that are made for family, and not because they're selling a religion, not because they want you to live a certain way. You don't have to be Christian, you don't have to be Jewish, you don't have to be Muslim. You just have to be good. And goodness shows. Goodness is part of love. So, and it's in the word God too, God is in goodness. Goodness is not in God, but I think goodness is in God. So anyway, let's say this. What about trafficking? All right, I asked someone to come and talk about it, and someone who knows the work. And I know very little about the resolve. I know very little about how we are going to solve this crisis in our society. I know it exists, and it's not just overseas. It's not just children from China or Hong Kong or someplace you never heard of, or the Himalayas, where actually I would doubt it would happen in Tibet. But we have trafficking. And I asked a guy here to talk about it because he's a director of a ranch that does take care of these kids. They're abused, and after they've been trafficked to it, God knows they have no clothing, they have nowhere to live, they have nowhere to go. But the fact of the matter is they have mental problems. They can psychologically, it's like, this is like the worst. It's mental waterboarding, as it were. And this is children starting their life. Now, the other worst thing, before I go into this, I want to mention it, is to go to Israel and go to Rashim, which is the museum. There's several of them. The one I'm speaking of is where the children were in Auschwitz. And you see the work that they were given by the Nazis to further their cause, and they abuse them and use them, but not necessarily sexually, but they didn't have a regard for anybody else's life, simply put. But now let's go into this thing here. This is real. It's happening right now. It's going on right now. All right, now Landon Dickerson. Let's remember that name because he's famous for this right now. Landon Dickerson. I have to learn him too. Executive Director of the Ranch Hands Rescue. Now what he is, he's from Texas. And they have a ranch, and they take these kids in there. I think mostly boys. Is that right, Landon?
Correct. Entirely boys.
How many kids you got over there?
Well, we don't disclose the number, but what I can tell you is at any given time we have up to 6.
So what do you do with them?
So Bob's House of Hope is actually the division of Ranch Hands Rescue.
Yeah.
It's the first safe house in the country for young men who've been sex trafficked. Before us, nobody was taking care of these kids. Zero.
Nothing to do with Bob Hope.
Huh? No, nothing to do with Bob Hope. Our founder and CEO, Robert Williams, is affectionately named Bob. And so in honor of him, we've named it Bob's House of Hope.
So why did he do this? What do you can tell us that part, huh?
I can. Unfortunately, he was one of these boys. It wasn't called sex trafficking back when it happened to him.
What was it called?
There wasn't a term, and there weren't programs. Nobody talked about it at all. And in fact, he spent years on the streets struggling with his addiction and struggling with abuse and neglect, and took him about 10 years to get clean and sober. And so he's been through everything that the young men were treating have been through. He's been through
That's
the same
called
thing.
hell.
Yeah.
It's been through hell.
Yeah, in a word.
So what did he do? Was he overseas or was that here?
That was here. That was in
Somebody
America.
traffics here? That I didn't get.
Oh, yeah. Trafficking mostly happens right here in your own backyard.
Not the Appalachia. That would probably be a poverty area, and I would think
I would imagine it happens there too, because it happens rural areas. Because most people that are trafficked, it's going to be by somebody they know, either a family member, a friend, a close relative. It's
that's
very
sexual
rarely.
Abuse. Sexual abuse is the same thing.
Yep.
It's
It
usually
usually starts
familiarity.
there, and then it escalates into the trafficking component from there.
So what do? Take a kid and offer him money, or do they just take him and rob him and run away with him? What
Well,
is
you
that
know,
about?
I give you a story. One of the young men that we've taken care of, his parents started plying him with meth at age 9, adopted parents. So they adopt this kid, start giving him meth at age 9, and then by age 12, they start taking him to concerts where they traffic him to people at the concerts. So the dad, the adoptive father, takes the money for himself and sells this kid 6-7 times a night for years. Years.
Well, so you're a director. You understand a little bit of the psychology of it.
Yes,
right?
sir.
I mean, you're studying it too.
Yes.
As you learn as we go.
Right.
So I would ask, how could a parent? What goes through a person? And I know everybody wants to ask this. What goes through a person's head when they sell their kid?
You know, Joey, I wish I had an answer for that one, but that eludes me as well. I don't understand how you could do this to a child. I really don't. You have to not see them as valuable. You have to see them as property. And that's, I think the psychology of it is that these people who do this, they see these kids as property, not as people. And in fact, a lot of traffickers will brand these boys with tattoos to claim them as their property.
Slavery.
That is exactly what it is. It's a modern day form of slavery.
So when you take a child and you sell the child, what about the person who's arranging it? There's a pimp involved?
Not always, but traditionally that's the term, is pimp. Now we call it commercial sexual exploitation, because with the advent of the internet, and especially in the time of COVID, a lot of these young people will start by trafficking themselves, because there's the third party seller, instead of being a pimp, is an app or a website. And then there's a buyer on the other end, and they're doing it because it's a way to make money, and it's a way to take care of themselves because they got bills. Because a lot of times their families kicked them out, or they're trying to escape the sexual abuse that happened in their family. They go from one hell to another.
So the damage is multi-layered.
We call it complex trauma, complex PTSD, which means multiple traumas over multiple years by multiple perpetrators. If you think of men coming back from war, shell shock, right?
Yeah.
Take that, multiply it by 10, and then imagine it happening to a child for years. That's what we're trying to undo. And that's why our program is actually 4 years, because we know that it takes that kind of time and intensive work to change turn the tide, turn the ship on this kind of trauma.
It took me 2 years for cocaine, they had Norprium,
Yeah.
that was a miracle drip for the brain. I had to work on recovery.
Takes a lot of work.
Recovery is, to be honest about it, is the beginning of wellness.
Yeah, absolutely.
So kids are not going to tell you they have this problem. I mean,
No.
you can't expect honesty from a child, can you?
No. Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that. Right before we started this, we were talking about the fact that a lot of boys, especially, are just labeled as bad kids. They end up with misdemeanors, felonies. They're thrown away. They're the throwaways because nobody wants them and they think they're just bad kids. But in fact, that's part of what got us into this work, is we were doing clinical work for kids in juvenile probation. And what we were finding repeatedly is a lot of these young boys coming through our program, our counseling program, were sexually exploited or abused by a family member or somebody close to the family, and it never was disclosed. and then working with our animal partners, because we rescue abused, neglected farm animals as well. Working with those special needs animals was the breakthrough for them to report what actually happened to them.
What about the girls?
We also see women and girls in our counseling program, but the safe house is just for males because, again, there wasn't one.
Yeah. Well, you could have a co-ed. I mean, these days it's acceptable, but there has to be a
separation.
Yeah,
right.
Separation.
Yeah, and so actually, it's very exciting. We are expanding later this year onto a 40-acre property where we'll be able to triple our capacity. And I don't want to keep anybody up at night, but one of the other
I do.
Fair enough. One of the other populations that we've really been working with that never gets talked about is the neurodivergent population, which means those with autism, intellectual and developmental disability, schizophrenia, those who their intellectual capacity is such that they can't advocate for themselves. And they call their traffickers bullies. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't think of sex trafficking when I hear the term bully. And these young people are being exploited at a significantly higher rate. And I'll give you a quick number. 2% of the general population will experience trafficking at some point in their life. That's 2% of 300 plus million people, right? That's a lot. But that's what we know, and it's still underreported. But that's known, 2%. For those with a significant mental or physical disability, it's 12%. 12%.
These days we have demographic studies on everything, and it's very difficult to get a survey because we are so separated. And people change their minds in about 2 seconds, if you notice, including me. And I have the deficiency, they call it. What is it? Attention deficiency disorder.
ADD.
You could say anything about what I have. But are you a psychologist, or you have any of that?
The LPC that you were asking about earlier is a licensed professional counselor.
Okay.
So I'm a trauma therapist. I work specifically with trauma recovery. That's my focus.
And how about Bob?
Bob, he is a CEO. So he actually rose through the ranks of Motorola. He went from being homeless on the streets to being one of the top-ranking members of Motorola when he retired in 2007. So,
of the new Motorola or the other one?
The old Motorola.
Oh, the old one was great.
Yeah.
You know what they were famous
Jack
for?
Wells, all of them, yeah.
Radios and police cars. And the flip phone.
Yeah.
Which is back.
Right? Yeah, that's true. Weirdly,
so
it is. It's
tell
back.
Bob there's hope.
Yeah,
well,
I will.
Bob Hope. Again, we're with that.
There we go.
I did my satellite show from Bob Hope's house years ago.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that's why I kept thinking of
Yeah,
that.
of his name. Yeah.
But having the give back gene, which Bob Hope also had.
That's true. He did.
And you guys are celebrating this, but you're in New York.
Yes.
And tomorrow you're going to be in Times Square.
That is correct.
Anybody wants to date this on tape or watching this broadcast, it's in the summer of 2023 that we're saying this. And at the beginning of school in New York,
That's right.
the end of summer vacations, in a horrible pickup time after the pandemic.
Right. Right.
But you're here to unfold with Clear Channel, the people who own iHeart.
That's right.
You're here to unfold a big billboard in Times Square.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that. This is the first time it's ever been done, but we're launching the first billboard campaign in Times Square for boys being sex trafficked to raise awareness of this. We have it in multiple ethnic representations, and we also have it in English and Spanish, and it is in a partnership with Clear Channel. It's never been done before. It'll run for 4 weeks, and it comes on the heels, actually, of a national and statewide campaign. We had LA and Atlanta prior, and we also had 70 cities in Texas. And prior to this Times Square billboard, it generated over 600 million impressions, and our traffic to our website and then other groups went through the roof when it came to noticing boys. And we've had several referrals from across the country of guys seeing the sign, seeing it themselves as victims, and calling us for help.
What does it say? What does it sign? What does
It
it
says,
want us to do?
Boys are sex trafficked too, and it gives the website, which has all the information on
what
it.
are we supposed to do when we see someone that doesn't look like they belong to someone? Is that it? I mean, what are the signs?
That's a great question. So a lot of the focus, and you mentioned this earlier, is women, right? Yeah. And what I tell people is if you're doing great work with women in this space, you can do great work with males too, okay? That's the starting point. And so the signs that people typically look for are large amounts of cash without any job or employment, right? Multiple cell phones, a lot of nice clothes or nice personal items, but no car, no place to live, no personal documentation. Often being with somebody who's older and seeming to be very scared of them and scared of authority, scared of medical personnel. Often they will show up with with medical personnel at least, repeat sexual infections and injuries that are unexplained, or they're accompanied by somebody. And this happens with both males and females. And the whole reason that that's important for me to mention, especially the medical professional part, is that medical professionals don't get training on what to look for with males. They just get it for females.
But
and
the
that's something
emergency
we're trying
room
to
does.
change.
The emergency room sees this.
They do. They see it all the time.
Yeah.
And the significance there, and just to add another layer to this, is sex trafficking is actually now the second largest nefarious moneymaker in the world, next to drug trafficking. And it's about to surpass drug trafficking. And the reason is because a drug, you use it once, and you have to get more, right? Or make more. Person, you can sell them multiple times a day and keep using them.
You have any kids?
No.
Well, it's scary.
It is terrifying. It's awful. The things these kids have been through, no rational person can comprehend it. I mean, they come in with rectal damage. They come in with bruises and cuts. One guy had glass embedded in his feet that had been there for years. They come in with all kinds of health issues, and like they've never had dental work. They've never had any kind of care. Like, we have to teach them how to properly brush their teeth, how to, make their own food, how to make a bed, how to take care of themselves. We have to literally work back from the ground up, because they've never been taught those things. Nobody's ever shown them how to take care of themselves.
The worst part of it in the film was Oliver, where the boys were orphaned and picked up by a leader. And there's a film, a Broadway show, but that's a play. Right. This is happening in real life.
Right.
And what's the outshoot now? How do you graduate from this?
So that's why the name is Bob's House of Hope, because we wanted it to be focused on hope and recovery, because what we're dealing with is absolutely horrific, and it doesn't matter who it is, male, female, transgender. It is horrific, whoever it's happening to, and we see them all as innocent victims. And we do help trans youth in our program as well, because we believe a victim is a victim is a victim, and our job is to help them recover, whatever that looks like. So our program is total wraparound care, which means we provide psych, medical, dental, legal, educational, housing, food, everything that someone needs to recover.
How about schooling?
Schooling, education, vocation, we cover all of it. And that's why it takes 4 years, because, they come in, like you said before, clothes on their back, no documentation, skinny as a rail, they got nothing.
Has anyone ever picked up the phone and said, hey, you know what, I'm being abused and I heard about you guys? Has that happened yet?
Yeah.
Because that's really a long shot.
It is a long shot, but amazingly it has. And I think the billboards have been part of that. They see that and they realize that's what's happening to me. If I can tell you another quick story.
Oh, you can tell me all you want.
Wonderful. A friend of mine that I knew for years, he never talked about where he came from. He came from a different state and didn't really understand it, but didn't really ask, And when we opened Bob's House of Hope, it was about 6 months after we opened, because we opened June of 2021. He called me up, and this has been a friend of mine for a decade, and he was crying, and he said, Landon, I've never told anybody that this happened to me as a kid, and it wasn't until I saw you opening the house that I realized that's what it was, and that it was real, and that I could actually recover from this. So he started going to counseling, started getting help, and now he's in a really, really good place. He's in recovery, he's sober, and he held that for years. And it was just seeing that somebody's taking it seriously enough to actually open a house was the thing he needed.
And the big attraction for kids is electronics.
That's true.
So now we've had a shift of consciousness. Everybody's got one.
True.
So what happens in the housing now? Do they have because that's an outreach, but also they can reach out.
Oh, yeah.
Unless, they don't have Wi-Fi or...
Right. That's a huge, the internet's a huge risk area, especially when it comes to trafficking, because there's so many ways to access somebody that way.
Have you dealt with that, with someone who's in and then they want to be out and they're in and out? And
that's a great question. The average number of times a woman will run from a safe house program before sticking with it is 7. And it seems to be the same with relapse and recovery as well. It's about 7 times somebody will relapse before they stick with recovery. At least that's the average. We're not having runners. And we're getting people calling us all the time asking how we do it. And I think the reason that we're able to, that they stay and they choose to stay, because it's entirely voluntary, is because we meet them where they're at and we do what we say we're going to do. Because if you put yourself in their shoes, if you come in, you've been through all the sexual abuse, but you found a way to make money doing it. So now you're early 20s or late teens, you're making all this money, you feel like you have freedom finally, even though you really don't. And you've got physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain, all these things. And now some stranger's asking you to come live in a house.
Yeah.
Of course you're going to run. Like, that sounds crazy. But if you tell them what you're going to do, you do it, and then you remind them of what you did, and you keep repeating that cycle, and you repeat it over and over until their brain chemistry shifts and they go, oh, now I get it. They feel safe. They feel trusted. They feel connected. And then that's when the recovery starts.
And you learn relationship. And that's what the animals do.
Exactly.
You have a relationship with an animal often, I would think.
Oh,
That's my guess.
Yeah, that's central to it, is the connection with the animals. It's critical to the recovery work because those animals have been through trauma too. They get it. They get it on a neurobiological level. And so there's no agenda. There's no nothing in
Dogs
between.
know that I'm a friendly person. I know that. I can say that. Mm-hmm. But I'm human. I'm not going to run around looking for a pit bull that likes me. but there's a certain kind of a vibe.
Oh, yeah.
And they know that animals have a sense. We have the freedom of expression, and we certainly have free will. But the animals have a sense of people who are orderly or kind. I think that. Is that true, or am I just...
No, they pick up on, we can call it energy, but really it's neurochemistry, but it's also how you're presenting in that moment. Are you coming to them with an open invitation for a connection, or are you telling them, back away from me? And some of the animals, especially those that have been through trauma themselves, can see through that anxiety wall and can help people break through that so that they're able to open up and actually start working on the trauma.
So we get into
beautiful.
demographics. You have certain color, you have certain national and religious backgrounds for everybody in our country. You know, our country's everybody. Yeah. This is the only country in the world, incidentally, that's everybody else's country, which is a wonderful thing to say. And since we are everybody else, we usually like to break down. I alluded to it earlier. I said Appalachia, which is kind of like a throwaway, but it's a poverty area. That's why I said that. And I don't know, is this some program that you would find more people to be from? People are always statistical. That's why I'm saying it. Sure. Otherwise, I accept everybody for who
people
they are.
People.
Yeah, just people. But there's a statistic, and it gives us the clue, the key. The language, you mentioned Spanish,
right.
Latin, and that's the second language here now.
True.
And you have also color, and you have new influences from other places that we did not accept people easily from.
That's true.
So is that created another dynamic?
It really has. I mean, because this impacts everybody. It doesn't matter what your background is. Anybody with vulnerability has the potential to be a victim of trafficking, because that's what predators prey on: vulnerabilities and vulnerable populations. So the more vulnerable an individual is, the more at risk they are. Doesn't mean they will be trafficked, just means they are at risk. So we're seeing all demographics, all ages. I mean, we've got survivors on our survivor advocate caseload that are in their 40s and 50s. So, I mean, we're seeing across the lifespan, but we're also seeing across all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic divides, and also all language divides. And taking on those who are Spanish speaking has been a new initiative and a new challenge for us, because I'm primarily English speaking, but we've hired bilingual staff to help meet that need.
Plus Texas,
right,
close. Do you have also ever have a fox in the chicken coop?
That's an interesting question. We are very, very mindful and very, very careful and vigilant about that. And so we thankfully haven't had that kind of issue, but we have heard stories of other programs where either a pimp will send their, what they call bottom bitch, in to infiltrate and recruit out, or, and this is really horrific, there have been safe houses opened that were actually avenues for trafficking. And that's just horrific as well. And then, perpetrators, they do try to infiltrate at all levels, no matter what industry you're in. And so we're very, very careful. We do FBI background checks, we do fingerprinting, we do interviews, we do constant training and oversight. I mean, we are, and you mentioned earlier the internet. We have a whole cybersecurity team that helps handle the IT side. I mean, we've got FBI, Homeland Security, local PD, everybody keeping an eye on what we're doing to put as many layers of protection in place as we can, because that's our number one duty, is to keep them safe.
Well, I opened up with a Maui shirt, and in Maui I saw today that there are looters.
Yep.
I mean, there's scumbags everywhere. They would come and loot after these people have suffered enormously. And there is also a story, I'll mention this briefly today, of 4 children were burned in a car, in one of the cars. They couldn't identify them.
It's horrific.
There's so much cruelty in our society, and you can't have a generalization for it. I don't know what motivates evil people, dark side. I don't know. It seems like a lot of it is money, but I don't want to blame everything on money. Some people they just haven't had what they want in life, and they take it out on someone else that is not going to have a life.
No. It's very hard to understand.
Am I looking at this with a wide eye, or?
I think so. I think you're looking at it with a very open mind. It is very hard to understand the mentality of a perpetrator or an abuser, and that would be a very long conversation to try to figure out how to get there. And there are other experts that can, answer that, because my focus is treating the victims. And so, yeah, I have a hard time comprehending that kind of cruelty as well.
Well, I'll pray for you.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Maybe a donation.
That would be great. That would be great. Donate, come see the billboard.
So what is it called again?
So Ranch Hands Rescue and Bob's House of Hope. And you can see the billboard in Times Square. It's already active. And then we're doing a press conference tomorrow at 11. But you can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, where we have regular updates and where we promote not only awareness activities, but also ways that people can get involved. Because it's not just donating. These young men need mentors, and they need people around the country who will show them that there's another side to life besides the horrors that they've seen. And so you can be that. Anybody watching can be that. Just please reach out and check us out, bobshouseofhope.org.
Thank you, Landon.
Thank you, Joey.
Great. Okay, we have our work to do. It's cut out for us, and we'll see you in Times Square.
Yes, sir.